Hi, this is Helen Thomas from the CDFM study group. All right, we're going to be reviewing the 2018 study guide for CDFM Module 1, Competency 3. It's now called for the 2018 Management's Responsibility for Enterprise Risk Management and Internal Control. So the name changed from the 2013 study guide. So first change. So just keep in mind that there are differences from the 2013 to the 2018. So you're going to come January 2019 and beyond, you're going to have to purchase the 2018 study guide from the American Society of Military Comptrollers, the ASMC, because there are newer topics in the 2018 study guides. And so it'll be difficult for you to use an older study guide to try to take the new test. So I would advise you to, if you have the ability to go ahead and complete the 2013 exams in 2018, great. If not, you have to invest in the 2018 study guide. So Module 1, Competency 3, Management Responsibility for Enterprise Risk Management and Internal Control. So I had an opportunity to kind of review briefly some of this material. Some of it are exactly the same. The other topic used to be manager's responsibility for internal control, but now we add the enterprise risk management. So there are going to be some differences there. All right, so background information. A lot of this you can read. Federal Managers Financial Integrity Act of 1982. That's the law that says we need to have these administrative controls in place to safeguard our government assets. OMB Circular A123. So for every one of the topics that you study, if there is a regulation or policy that governs that particular topic, it is important for you to know it. So we're talking about internal control, risk management, OMB Circular A123. That's easy to remember. OMB is Office of Management and Budget. So that tells you who that policy guidance is coming from. You got to remember your hierarchy. It starts with OMB, Department of Defense, and the other agencies, education, state, and so forth. And then under the Department of Defense, then you have the services and the DoD staff. So OMB Circular A123 deals with management responsibility for enterprise risk management and internal control. And there should also be a DoD level policy. And what is that called? So for internal controls, the DoD policy is DoD Instruction 5010.40, which is on page 137. So it's OMB Circular 123, DODI 5010.40. Make sure you know it's 5010.40 because you could be asked, okay, select the right response. DODI 5010.20, 5010.30, 5010.40, and 5010.50. The only one I think you're really going to have to grasp for DoD instructions is 5010.40. All right, Federal Managers Financial Integrity Act of 1982 says we are to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse in our agencies, and we need to make sure that we have these checks and balances in place to assure accountability of our assets. So they're listed, all the things that are covered under the Federal Managers Financial Integrity Act. All right, page 9 is something new. Enterprise Risk Management and Internal Control, the structure, talking about. So now you see the actual OMB Circular A123 goes into more detail, gives you the definition of the management responsibility for ERM, internal control, risk management, the different section, a lot of information. Again, I don't focus on things that you can just read to study. The ERM model, page 11, that's also new. So the above example, and they have the circle and you have the 1 through 7 items. Establish the context, understanding our articulation of the internal and external environments of the organization. You do your initial risk assessment. You identify what risk you may have in your organization. So it's like going through that risk management process for those who've had the opportunity to do that. So once you identify the risk, you analyze and evaluate it. You want to know what type of alternative decisions do we have? What type of safety precautions are we going to need to take to deter or to manage this risk? And then we have to monitor, review, continuous risk. So I would say for the ERM model, make sure you know the 7 steps, the order in which they occur. Establish context, initial risk identification, analyze and evaluate the risk, develop alternatives, respond to the risk, monitor and review, and continuous risk identification. Because just because you put measures in place this week, next week, it may not be as effective. So you have to continuously have your checks and evaluations and inspections. Your risk profile is listed on 12, and it goes through how you identify what are the important objectives of your internal control program. And then it walks you through the categories we discussed and how you do that. So internal control on 13, it gives you the definition, gives you the circular again. Now, key there, internal control, when it comes to the most authoritative instructions on internal control, you can go to the Government Accountability Office, the GAO Green Book. So if you look on page 13 where it talks about internal control and competency 3 of module 1, it starts off, the Green Book defines internal control. Where do we get, who writes the Green Book? Internal Control Green Book is written by the GAO. So you have some key players. So now we've talked about internal control risk management. So GAO, which is, who's GAO? Let's pause there. Check on learning. GAO, Government Accountability Office, is an independent auditing agency that works directly for Congress. So remember, when Congress gives us the appropriation, there's a lot of restrictions on it. You have appropriations of funding that has specific purpose, time, and amount. And there's some that are fenced. They have limitation. They have ceiling. They have all kind of limitations on them. Or they tell you you must use these funds to do X, Y, Z. Well, we know if nobody checks to make sure that we're following those instructions, we're going to do what we want to do with these funding. So what Congress has to its advantage is it has the GAO. So the GAO then will go and inspect and evaluate all of the executive branch, which includes all of us. All the agencies that use the federal budget could be evaluated and inspected by the GAO. And their sole purpose is to come in and to identify, they look at what Congress says, the do's and don'ts, and they look at what we're doing to see if we're following those procedures. So the GAO also issues guidance on internal control, and you can find that in the GAO Green Book. For each of the topics, I think we'll talk about the Green Book. Later, we'll talk about the Yellow Book when you talk about auditing, and the Red Book when you talk about specific appropriation. So you have to know which GAO policy or regulation governs those particular areas. All right, so GAO Green Book. OMB Circular got more instructions, internal control, financial reporting. So they give you some instructions on the OMB Circular. So you have to read through all of this information on that. So some general controls are the policies and procedures that apply to all the large segment of your organization. Security management, access control, like I cannot be an inputter and certify my own, separation of duties, configuration management. These controls provide reasonable assurance. All the areas within your organization that could potentially create fraud, waste, abuse, or criminal actions. Segregation of duties mentioned on 16 and so forth. It goes into more detail on page 17 with the Green Book, Standards for Internal Control. So whenever you hear Green Book, Red Book, Yellow Book, it comes from the GAO. Green Book talks about risk management, internal control. All right, so a lot of this is information. The steps on page 19, the components of the internal control, GAO framework. So those are the basic things that you have to have in an internal control program based on GAO guidance. Control of the environment, that's the foundation. Risk assessment is for everything that you do, there's a risk associated with it. Control activities, and let's see, let me make sure it goes into each one. If not, I'll discuss. Yeah, it's going to go into each one. So control activities, information and communication, and monitoring. So this is the same information that's in the 2013 study guide. So it's nothing new here. All right. So what does control environment? And with this, you're going to have to know those 5 items, those 5 phases, and what happens at each phase. Make sure you know the order in which they occur and what happens. For instance, if I say, what's the difference between control environment, control activities? So the environment is having that positive environment. If you're the manager, the supervisor, the leader, because it's a manager's program, so that it fosters, that means it's a positive. Everybody wants to make sure we're following the SOPs, we're following. So you're fostering oversight. You're providing that supervisory where you recruit, develop, you retain personnel that are competent, that knows how to do the job. They're certified in their craft. Risk assessment. Control activities are those things you put into place. And control activities, if you think about your standard operating procedures, your SOPs, those are the documents. So setting the environment, controlling the environment, controlling activities, things we actually do. Information and communication is simply making sure that everybody knows what the rules are. Because you can come up with a policy, put it in a book, sit it on the counter, on the table, in your cubicle, and if nobody knows what it says, then it's still not effective. Now, to me, the most important step in this process of internal control is your monitoring. Just like I talked about the GAO coming in and inspecting and checking up on us to make sure we're adhering to what Congress says with the appropriation, then monitoring in your internal controls is you do those inspections. So assessing and improving your internal control, they give some hints there and how to do that, how to approach your internal control evaluation. What area? Because again, you can't check everything. So in most internal control program will have specific areas throughout the year in which we will evaluate. Identification of deficiencies. Identify if some process is not correct, whether it's because remember, we also do evaluation on financial data. So it's either our process in how we do something versus our financial data. Is the information, the documentation in our hand being put into our systems and presenting the correct results. So you also have to do controls on that. So categories of reporting: internal control deficiencies. A control deficiency exists when the design or operation does not allow management or personnel in the normal course of our business. So no matter what we do in our normal course of our business, we cannot have reasonable assurance. A significant deficiency and a material weakness. So make sure you review page 23 of the 2018 study guide, module 1.3. I recommend you read it like a novel. You read all of it, but all I'm going to do is review and kind of point out some things that you need to make sure that you don't miss. So I emphasize certain things on here. All right, page 25 talks about the DODI instruction. So the DOD instruction, that 5010.40. So we talk about GAO. That's the GAO Green Book. And we've talked about the OMB circular dealing with internal control is OMB circular A123. And now we're talking about the DODI 5010.40 managers internal control program. And then it goes into what the required by the USD comptroller. Who's the USD comptroller? That's the senior resource manager at the DOD level responsible for budget. So the chief financial officer for the DOD is the USD comptroller. And so it says that it's required USD to establish, and I'm not going to read through all of it, but make sure you read through what is covered under the 5010. Then it goes into DOD specific material weakness and what we have to do to report on internal controls, what DOD's requirements are to the Office of Management and Budget when it relates to internal control. All right, so annually, each organization has to submit a statement of assurance on 29. So DOD and Office of the Secretary of Defense, that's the OSD, statement of assurance report contents. And it tells you, each one of those tells you what's in the package. So you have your cover letter that says you have reasonable assurance that you have all measures in place to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. And what are we trying to safeguard? We're trying to safeguard our assets. So there's some definitions on 31 through 33 of the chart. Of course, make sure you review the terminologies that are used in internal control. Oh, that's a short one because we're actually at the end. So let me go back at the report. Let's see if it says it in explicit level of control, the DOD, unmodified, modified state. Okay, so let's go back to page 1329, which is the report contents. If you look at number 3, it gives you each assurance level. So it gives you the 3 assurance levels because this is different from the other study guide. It says unmodified statement of assurance, a modified statement of assurance, and a statement of no assurance. Let's see what it says. So unmodified statement of assurance, an unqualified statement of assurance provides reasonable assurance that internal controls are effective with no material weaknesses. I'm going to stop there. The second one, modified statement of assurance. A modified statement of assurance provides reasonable assurance are effective, and the exception, we have one or more material weakness. Statement of no assurance, meaning your operation, you don't know what's going on or you have no control over what's going on. I don't know if too many supervisors or managers will put that one on there. You better make sure you're doing everything you can throughout the year so you don't have to put this statement. A statement of no assurance provides that no assurance can be provided that internal controls are effective because few or no assessments were conducted The noted material weaknesses are pervasive, meaning we can't really figure out what's wrong. So if you wait, again, this is an annual report. So you don't want to wait until this report is due to let your higher command know, hey, I'm having issues and I have no assurance. So ideally, you want to be dealing with this throughout. That's why our internal control processes require us to have evaluations and inspections of these things all throughout the year, so that when it comes to the point, you either have an unmodified statement of assurance, or meaning you have no material weakness, everything is going golden, or a modified statement of assurance. So that's pretty short. So that's module 1, competency 3, management responsibility for enterprise risk management and internal control. And this is the third part of the 2018 study guide for CDFM module 1. All right, so be sure to subscribe, leave me some comments, questions. If I don't know it, I'll contact ASMC, ask a question for you, and post it back on the YouTube channel. And be sure to share the link with others. Like some of you may stumble on this and you've already gotten your CDFM. Be sure to share the link with someone else who's studying and struggling. My goal is to try to help to simplify the information as much as I can. Remember, with these exams, you cannot learn word for word what the information is and think you're going to see it in the exact format on the exam. You have to understand the process in order to be successful. So thank you, and I'll see you guys again next time.